Hello friends, in this video we are going to discuss about clutch and its construction, its application and uses. Okay, first we must understand what is a clutch. Actually, it's a mechanism used to connect or disconnect the engine from the rest of the transmission elements. Okay, this is one of the major element in the transmission system. Mainly, whenever the power is not to be transferred from the engine to the wheel, we can press the clutch pedal so that we can disengage the power transmission from the engine to the wheel. So the clutch is disengaged when the driver presses the clutch pedal. Then clutch is disengaged for starting, changing the gear, then stopping and idling. Okay, so during running condition it must be in the normal engaged condition. So when the clutch is engaged, the power is transmitted from the engine to the rear wheels or the front wheels according to the type of drive used in that automobile. When the clutch is disengaged, okay, power does not flow from the engine to the power wheel. Then the working principle of a clutch. So we all know that the power transmission between two discs, okay, when they are separated by a distance. So here there are two discs D1 and D2. If there is a gap, assume that both the discs are rotating. If there is a gap in between, the power will not be transmitted from D1 to D2. But when it is contacted together, okay, the power will be transmitted from D1 to D2, okay, through friction. So this is the working principle of a clutch. Okay, so here the two revolving friction surfaces, okay, so that are made to contact with each other and which will be under pressed condition in the engaged situation. Then it will, the driving end will make the driven end to rotate and transmit the power. So the power will be transmitted from one end, that is from the driving end, that is from the engine side to the gearbox end. And the power transmission or the amount of power which is transmitted from the driving end to the driven end is generally, it is depending on the area of the surface of contact and the pressure applied onto the friction surfaces and the type of friction material which is used during this power transmission. Then the driving member of the clutch is having a flywheel and a pressure plate and springs and some of the other smaller parts. And the driven end will have a clutch plate and other transmission elements. Okay, then the whole assembly, okay, it will have driving part and the driven part. Okay, both are combined, both are collectively called as clutch assembly. So from this diagram we can understand, okay, there is a driving end and the driven end. Okay, when the driving end is making contact with the disc, it makes the driven end to rotate and the power is getting transmitted. When the driver presses the clutch pedal, it releases that power transmission and the gap between the driving disc and the driven disc are separated or it is more. Then function of a clutch. Okay, the main function of the clutch is to smoothly transmit power from engine to the gearbox. So if we don't have a clutch, we cannot ensure the smooth power transmission from engine to gearbox. The engine normally will have a particular speed. When we suddenly connect that speed or that force with the wheels, it cannot take that sudden load. So it must be smoothly transmitted, then only we can move the vehicle from the rest or from a slow position to a fast position. Then to shift up the gear, okay, so whether to shift it up or shift it down, we need the support of this clutch, otherwise it will damage the teeth of the gearbox. Then To engage or disengage the power transmission, we need this gearbox. Then the during the time of emergency, we need the support of clutch. Okay, so whenever needed, whether it is an emergency situation or normal situation, okay, by pressing the clutch pedal and disengaging the power transmission, we need not even stop the engine. Okay, the engine will be running at idling speed, but power will not be transmitted from the driving into the driven end. The major requirements, it should able to transmit the maximum torque. Okay, main thing is the torque transmission from the engine to the other parts of the transmission system. Then during engagement or disengagement, there should not be any jerk to the vehicle or to the other parts of the automobile. And the parts of the clutch must be dynamically balanced, otherwise it will undergo failure, since the parts, that is the inner parts of the clutch assembly, will be undergoing a higher velocity, or it will rotate at higher speed. So if there is imbalanced situation, or if some of the parts of the clutch assembly is not properly balanced, that will undergo failure. Then the parts of the clutch must damp vibration. Okay, so it should not create any noise while engaging and disengaging the power transmission. Then it should occupy very less or minimum space, and it should be easily operatable. Okay, so we should conveniently operate the clutch. Okay, and it should be made as light as possible, and the weight of the clutch also must be minimum. It must be trouble free, and it should have a longer life. Then it should be easy to inspect, adjust and repair. So these are all some of the important requirements of a clutch. Okay, then the main parts. Okay, there are three important parts in a clutch. We can classify that into driving member, driven member, and then operating member. Driving member is the front end of the clutch assembly, which is starting from flywheel. Then the power will be transmitted from the flywheel to the pressure plate, since both are bolted together. Then it is transmitted through pressure springs and release levers. Okay, so the power will be transmitted from the flywheel to the pressure plate, and then it will be okay, further transmitted to the driven member. Okay, so it has a cover or housing, and all the parts of the clutch are kept inside this particular assembly or housing assembly. Okay, so here the blue colored region is the flywheel, and the power is transmitted from the clutch plate to the flywheel, and then it is transmitted to the driven part. That is the green colored one is the clutch plate. Okay, and the clutch plate is directly coupled with the driven shaft, or it is to the transmission. Okay, here we can see. So when the clutch is disengaged, the driven shaft will stop its rotation, but in the normal engaged condition, the power from the flywheel will be transmitted to the transmission end, or the to the driven end. Okay, so the driven member has got a disc or plate, which is normally called as clutch plate. Okay, which is having friction materials, and it should last longer, and there should not be any slip. Okay, the slip will be there, but it must be within the expected level. Then clutch plate is gripped between flywheel and the pressure plate. Okay, if it is pressed properly and gripped properly, then only the power can be transmitted from the driver driving member to the driven member. And the next one is operating member, that is the pedal or lever. Okay, so in this is the pedal. So when the driver presses the pedal, okay, the disengagement will happen. So that is the third important part of the clutch assembly. Thank you.